What is AWS and why it matters? The company Amazon Web Services, or AWS, is a very large cloud computing service. It helps many companies, websites, apps, and even governments by giving them computer power, storage, network, and other services over the Internet. According to sources, AWS is the world's largest cloud provider. Because of this, many popular apps, games, streaming services, banks, and many more depend on AWS to work. Because AWS is so important, when something goes wrong in AWS, the impact can be large. In simple words, many things in the Internet world rely on AWS. So, if AWS has a problem, lots of other things can have problems too. Unfortunately, AWS services have gone through a dark day recently. What happened? On or about October 20th, 2025, AWS suffered a major outage. The outage began early in the day, U.S. time, and affected many services globally. The root cause was identified as a problem related to the domain name system, DNS, and other internal AWS subsystems in the U.S. East 1 region of AWS, Northern Virginia region of AWS. In more detail, AWS reported that an underlying subsystem responsible for monitoring the health of our network load balancers had problems, and that DNS resolution of the DynamoDB API endpoint in US East 1 failed. Because DNS is like the phone book of the Internet, it translates human names of websites into numeric addresses. When AWS's DNS failed, many services could not locate servers properly and thus did not work. AWS said that by later in the day, U.S. Eastern Time, most services had returned to normal operations. But even after returning to normal, there were backlogs of messages, and some services still had elevated error rates and delays. What did the outage cause? What were the effects? Because AWS supports many services, the outage caused multiple apps, websites, games, streaming services, educational platforms, and financial systems to fail or slow down. For example, social media apps like Snapchat were down. Games like Fortnite and Roblox were disrupted. Financial or payment apps were impacted. Example, Venmo, Coinbase. Streaming and educational services also had trouble. For example, students could not submit online assignments because their system was blocked. Even Amazon's own services, like shopping website, Alexa, Ring devices, and warehouses were affected. The outage was global. Many countries, many regions reported issues. Thus, daily life, business operations, online classes, online payments, and entertainment were all disrupted. Responses from AWS and others. AWS responded by posting updates on their health dashboard and saying they were working on mitigation and recovery. They acknowledged the issue: DNS, monitoring subsystem, internal AWS network load balancers, and said recovery was underway. Experts commented. They said this outage shows how vulnerable the Internet is, how many systems rely on a few big providers, and that companies should build better fault tolerance and backups. Governments and regulators also took note. For example, in the UK, MPs raised questions about reliance on cloud providers for critical services. Some companies publicly apologized or explained that their service was down because of AWS. Losses and risks. Although exact dollar amounts may not be fully clear yet, the outage meant lost productivity, lost revenue, disrupted services, frustrated users, and a risk to trust. The fact that many systems depend on one provider means that a single failure can ripple widely. Experts warn, if such an outage had been caused by a cyber attack, the damage could have been even worse. Also, companies that built their system without adequate redundancy, for example, only in US East 1 or only relying on AWS, were more exposed. Broader lessons and thoughts. This incident invites reflection on how modern internet infrastructure is built. Some key thoughts are: we learned that when only a few large cloud providers serve a large part of internet services, the system becomes more fragile. Companies should consider using multiple regions, multiple cloud providers, or offline or fallback systems so that a single point of failure is less catastrophic. Regulators may need to think about how critical digital infrastructure is governed and whether there should be requirements for redundancy or resilience. For users, when services go down, it reminds us how much we rely on digital systems every day for payments, communication, work, school, entertainment. For AWS and other cloud providers, this is a call to keep improving monitoring, fault detection, regional isolation, disaster recovery, and clear communication with customers and the public. Summary statement. In summary, AWS is a huge cloud computing provider that many companies and services rely on. On October 20, 2025, AWS had a major outage caused by DNS and internal subsystem failures in its US East 1 region. The outage knocked out or disrupted many apps, websites, games, educational and financial services around the world. AWS and many others responded, saying service was restored, but the event revealed how fragile and interconnected modern digital life is. It led to losses, risk of trust, and a strong reminder that redundancy and resilience are very important in the cloud era.